Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Class, we were reading the lesson Silver Lining, and we came to know that the writer he visited a family, and there was some problem with that family, and they decided to sort out that problem by writing some chits and giving the new guests who arrived there just to save the girl from any type of embarrassment. So they write these lines in the chits and handed over it to all the new guests. And what happened, we see it now. A line to the effect that might be spared question about her was removed by Mrs. Ahad on the plea that it would not be compatible with her spirit of hospitality. As it was, she felt the note was not a very kind one to be given to the people who were going to make her guest house their temporary home. But she gave consent to save the girl untold misery and helplessness she experienced every time a stranger approached her. So in this paragraph we came to know that the visitor, the guest who was there, Mr. Nadeem, he write these lines to give the new guests, but Mrs. Ahad she shortened some lines. She was in the view that some lines are not, she felt it correct to give the newcomers who came there as their guests, but she was later on agreed on giving these chits to the new guests as to save the girl from helplessness and from miseries and from the unhappiness. The ruse worked well, even beyond our expectation, though a few sympathetic questions were still put to the parents. The poor child was spared. Later, the girl herself slowly became intimate with many of the guests. The Ahads felt relieved and thought that at least one of their problems was temporarily solved. So their trick worked a lot. They gave the chits to the new guests, and even they did not ask the questions in front of the girl. She was spared from all that problems. Even they asked the questions to the parents, but the girl was spared from all that situation, and they were happy that the problem was solved temporarily. But they had a strange visitor one day. What happened one day? It was late in the afternoon, and I was talking to the landlord, it's me, Mr. Ahad, about some packed lunch that I needed the next day. I was planning a short excursion by myself to a group of caves nearby. He wanted to visit some caves nearby, and he was talking about his packed lunch to Mr. Ahad. The landlord was in a hurry, arranging things for a new guest who had booked a room for the season and was supposed to be moving in any moment, arriving by the mail train. Mr. Ahad was preparing for a new guest, and sure enough, soon a young man came in with the porter carrying his luggage. He was barely 25, clad in an ill-fitting tweed suit with drooping shoulders and white trousers bottom. This is all the description of the boy, how he was wearing his dress and what was his appearance. It was a new guest of them. Because of the journey, he looked untidy. His hair, his necktie, his shoes, and his all unkempt and needing attention. But he had a cheerful face and a jet black eyes sparkling with vitality. Mr. Ahad stepped forward and asked Mr. David, I presume. This is the physical appearance of the boy. He looked very beautiful and he looked very attractive, but his appearance, just because of the traveling, he looked a little bit disordered and disarranged. So Mr. Ahad immediately came forward to welcome him, and he asked his name and even told his name, that I think you are Mr. David. The young man looked closely at his face, smiled and nodded. It means that he moved his head in saying yes or no. So at that moment he said, yes, I am Mr. David, but not with the words, just he nodded his head. Room number 18, please. Everything is ready. These are the words of Mr. Ahad. The young man again looked at him, smiled and nodded. He paid the porter. He bowed low, for he was not asked to return the change, and disappeared. The young man gave me a brief, friendly look and sat before a huge book which the landlord had pushed before him, making at the necessary entries about himself and his intended stay. There was a book, just we stay in any hotel, we have to fill up our questions, that what's your name and how much time you are going to stay there. At this time, he discovered the sealed envelope containing the typed chit laying on the table. Addressed to him by name, he took the cover, tore it open. This coincided with the entry of the landlady into the room. She hurriedly asked her husband if this was the new guest, and having received confirmation, came forward and shook hands with the young man. When the young man was doing the entries on the register, he was also given the envelope having the chit about their daughter. He tore it, opened it, and at the same time, Mrs. Ahad also entered the room, and she confirmed about the new guest, and she shook her hand with that person. Did you have a nice journey, Mr. David? She asked with her sweet smile. The young man smiled and nodded nonchalantly. It means that uninterestedly or unconcernedly, as if to say, well, neither very pleasant nor very unpleasant. It was also the answer by his physical gestures. He didn't say any word in response. Would you like to have a hot bath immediately or tea first? The young man pursed his lips and shrugged his shoulders, obviously implying that one would be as good as the other and that he had no preferences. We can notice that Mr. and Mrs. Ahad welcomed that man very warmly, and they showed their courtesy and showed their hospitality and asked him different small questions, kind questions, but the boy was just giving them answers only by the gestures. He didn't say a single word. The young man was pursed his lips, mean that he just tightened his lips and shrugged his shoulders and shook his shoulders, and showing his response that he could do anything. There is no preferences. Both the landlord and the landlady were by now slightly disconcerted. They felt uneasy by his behavior, that how he is responding them, and what they inferred to be their guest's pride and arrogance. They felt that their guest is little bit having the pride, since he had not even designed to reply adequately their polite inquiries, as he was not answering their inquiries, so they were little bit upset at the moment. The young man meanwhile took out the typed chit and started reading it. As soon as he had gone through it, he looked around astonished. The little girl Maheen was at the moment playing in the courtyard. We could see her sitting near the flower beds. The young man looked at all of us with a smile and darted out towards her. Later on, when the boy opened the chit, he read what is written on that chit. He just looked on everybody who was staying there, and suddenly he looked the girl who was playing there outside in the garden. He didn't say a single word. He immediately ran towards that girl. No, it's very strange, Mr. Ahad cried out in protest. How rude he is. Mr. Ahad was quite surprised at his attitude. First, he was not giving them any answer, and later on reading the chit, instead of not touching the girl, he immediately ran towards the girl. He shouldn't have ignored our request like this, the landlord put in more mildly. I too was a bit upset, for it was obvious that our effort to save Maheen embarrassment from strangers was going to fail in this instant. And at the moment, they felt that their trick did not work on that person. After a few moments, we all walked out to the veranda, and I was apprehensive of that scene. The scene that confronted us was least expected. What they saw there, it was quite unexpected to them. And what they saw there, the strange young man was reclining on the grassy ground, and Maheen was sitting on his lap. He was showing her the flowers, and suddenly, like the sound of a gun exploding, the shrill animal-like laughter of Maheen pierced the air. What they saw there, the stranger was sitting, and Maheen was sitting in his lap, and she was loudly laughing, and they were quite surprised on the behavior of the girl. The parents looked at each other with wonder and amazement. Our daughter has not laughed like this for years, Mr. Ahad said. Curious, we watched the two of them, who were now walking towards us hand in hand. Maheen ran to her mother and danced about her with joy. She made her queer sounds of mama, mama, and widely pointed to the young man. This was all the attitude of the girl. She was quite happy, she was laughing, and Mr. Ahad said that she hadn't laughed in such a way from many years. So we all were much surprised on the reaction of the girl. She was quite happy. It was Mr. David who came to our rescue. We soon realized that he was deaf and dumb too. So it was the reason why he did not reply all the soft inquiries of Mr. and Mrs. Ahad. He was also dumb and deaf. His strange, ambiguous silence, his sudden rush for the girl on reading the note, all became instantly clear to us. It took us time to digest the news, and then both parents broke into incoherent statements of profuse apologies that they had not noticed it earlier. So the writer and the parents also came to know the situation that the boy David, he was also dumb and deaf, and on realizing that one, Mr. and Mrs. Ahad started to apologize and that they did not notice this one first in the first time. So imagining the type of the man they were talking to, they spoke in half sentences and tried to convey the rest through the gestures. Now they realized that he could not speak or listen, so they tried to talk to him with gestures. But the young man had not the slightest difficulty in understanding them. He appeared to read their lips. He could understand everything what they were saying by the movement of their lips. He gracefully acknowledged their warmth and either nodded or shook his head in reply. He just giving his replies by movement of his head or body. For more complicated and lengthy answers, he used pen or paper. If he want to give something long answer, so he used the paper and pen. The next day, Mrs. Ahad was full of news. She talked as she had never talked before. She mentioned the stranger and the plans for the betterment of Maheen. He had outlined to her and her husband. There were schools for such people, he told them, though they were beyond the most people's means. He had himself been educated in one such institution abroad and had now returned to Pakistan to render the same useful services to the others by starting a school there. She almost broke down with the gratitude when she said that he had agreed to accept Maheen as his first pupil. So when Mrs. Ahad came next morning to the writer, she was full of news. She wanted to talk too much and she was talking in such a manner that she didn't talk before. It shows her happiness. She was quite happy and she told him that this stranger, this man whose name was David, he told them that there were schools for the such people and he himself get educated from such a school from any country, and now he is there to open the school for such people. And she was quite happy and she was quite thankful to the man, and she told that he had agreed to accept Maheen as his first pupil. It means that he will accept her as his first student. He had emphatically stated that the girl could in course of time live almost as normal a life as anyone of us who had the parts of hearing and speech. He told them that after getting education from such school, Maheen would be able to speak like the normal people. She will not be lag behind from any normal person. Mrs. Ahad laughed like a carefree girl. It shows her happiness, how much happy she was at the moment. She gave us an extra helping of jam and butter and honey at the table. She looked the happiest woman in the world. So this very touching story, their girl was unable to speak and listen, and the boy who came there, they felt that it was the solution of their problem now, and they felt too much happy at the moment. So from this story you can get the point that appearance does not tell the truth sometimes about the people, just like in the case of Mr. David. So I think you understand and you like this lesson. Now we will do the exercise.